Um, Greetings, everyone. I'm Abel Simon. I recognize everyone in this room. I don't think I see any new faces, except for maybe you. Since this is the Hudson School, the majority of you will probably have a high interest in languages. Just 5 minutes ago in this room, we had a presentation that was very heavy on exploring a new culture and learning a lot about other languages. Some of you might speak French or German, possibly English, and I don't really have much interest in other languages used to speak to other human beings, but what I do have a lot of interest in is using languages to talk to programs and create your own programs and talk to computers. But before I get into that, I actually had a lot of interest in this from a younger age as well, but I think it was half a decade ago my father helped me complete my first computer after I researched it for a while. And based off of that, it just kind of grew into more and more of a high-level interest, because from a younger age I started playing a lot of video games, and that's how I got really heavy into technology itself. And from this, I decided that it's time to take this level of interest further into something I can maybe expand on in college and maybe learn a lot more about. So I figured the best way to do this would be to learn about Python, which is one of the most common programming languages as of today. Now, first I'll explain to you what Python is if you're not familiar with it. It's described as a high-level general-purpose programming language, and the reason it's so widely known at this point is because it has a very simple and easy-to-learn syntax in comparison to other programming languages. And I think this is true for myself especially because when I started learning about it, I recognized that you can very quickly type in your code and you can press a key and you can run the program immediately. So it has a very fast edit, test, and debug cycle compared to other programming languages. Now, why didn't I get into this sooner, even though I always had a high interest in programming languages, is because when I was younger, I essentially saw something akin to this picture. And this frightened a younger version of me because it's very, very confusing. And I still can't tell you what a lot of these mean because I'm not familiar with some of the functions that it calls at the beginning. But still, I figured that if I'm going to call myself a computer science major next year, it would only make sense for me to spend this project time to learn more about one of the most popular programming languages as of today. Now, all the programs I will show you today are things that I myself have made. I've made about a dozen different programs over the course of the past 3 weeks, but I'll show you some simple ones and some more complicated ones to try and show you the progression that I encountered during the few weeks. Now, what I'll follow for this whole presentation is this is what the code itself is, and this is what it translates to on the right, and all of them will be like that. So this is a very simple hello world program, which you probably, when you start learning a programming language, you usually start with something simple, and it's usually hello world. What this does is first you start by using the print function, which just directly prints out what you put into that text area there. Afterwards, I learned how to do an input function, which is telling the computer to ask for the user's input. And what I did here was make it so that my name at this specific line is whatever the user types into that spot. The reason I did this is because I want to return it later. I wanted to say, it is nice to meet you, and then whatever you put into that line there. So if Dr. Salai types Dr. Salai into this part here, it'll say, it is nice to meet you, Dr. Salai. But the important thing to remember here is that it doesn't really matter what you put your name in as. The computer can't really know if it makes sense or not. You could say Donald Duck. Well, it's nice to meet you, Donald Duck. You can say, what's your name? Pasta Linguini. It's nice to meet you, Pasta Linguini. What is your name? A girl has no name. Or no one. It doesn't really matter at all. Python can never know anything other than what you tell it or the preloaded modules and functions that are already inside of it. And so realizing this was the first step in kind of changing my thinking going forward. Oh, I went forward twice. So where do we go from this simple hello world program? Well, I started making a lot of conversational programs that just involve the computer talking to you. And first I started with like this program that just tells you a joke every time you press enter, for example. The first joke was, where do you find a dog with no legs? I don't know where. Right where you left them. But it just goes very simply until you get to this spot right here. Like I wanted it to tell a very specific kind of joke. And in order for that to work, you have to ask the computer if he's happy. Because it wouldn't make sense at all if you didn't ask him, because he responds and says, no, I'm a program and don't have emotions. But in order for me to learn how to do something like this, I needed to learn about like if and else statements. So here, unless you type, "Are you happy?" I told the program not to return, not to continue to the next step unless you type specifically, "Are you happy?" And the reason you see it 4 times is because I put different variations just in case you don't put a question mark or you don't capitalize an A. And if you don't type that, it'll just keep reiterating this line until you type it so that it makes sense. And next, we go into some things that are a lot more complicated, like this program I made that took many hours to make. It's very long, so you're not going to see a lot of the code for it. But what it is a number guessing game, and it starts out and he asks for your name, like with the Hello World program, and he tells you that you have 5 guesses to guess correctly what his number is, which is randomly generated between 1 and 20. If you get it wrong 5 times, there's a chance that he gets you a 6th bonus try, but that's only if he feels sorry for you. And I kind of added a chance factor that only sometimes will he give you that bonus question. And I wanted to have like a personality, so it's more nice or rude to you depending on how many tries you've already taken. See, I'll have on the right like 3 tries that happen. The first one is myself, and I told him my name's Abel, and I got it right in 2 tries. So to help people gauge where they are in the course of the game, I made it so that he tells you if you're too high or too low, and that's what these are. But I also made it so that if you put a number that isn't between 1 and 20, he'll like ask you what's wrong with you. I told you it's between 1 and 20. But that actually took a long time for me to figure out how to do, because then I had to put it so that the guess has to be lower than what the number that the computer generated is, but it also has to be higher than 1, or it has to be lower than 20. And it took me a while to kind of figure out how to do that without it just displaying this line when you actually put a number that was between 1 and 20. And here we have just, I kind of got lucky with this one because I wanted to show it to you, but it took a while for me to get the 1 to 20 chance of getting it right on the first try. But he calls you a hacker if you get it right on the first try because it's a low chance of you doing so. Here is like a longer version of it. This is when my dad played, and it says, "What's your name?" "My name is Jerry." And then he tried it about 5 times, and he got it right on the, I think he actually got it right on the bonus 6th try because the computer felt sorry for him on the final time, because he was really bad at it and couldn't get it right any of these times. Next, we're going to get into something called problem solving in Python. And there's 3 different types of problems that can occur when you make something in Python. There's syntax, runtime, and semantic. Syntax is very simple. It's when you type something that isn't in proper Python language. That's what this is here. I put an indent when it shouldn't have been there. And so the program didn't start at all. When you have a syntax error, it just doesn't start. It tells you the error and you have to fix it before it'll start at all. Here is a runtime error. It's when you write something that's in proper Python language, but it doesn't make sense. And so it just errors out while it's running at that specific line. Here, I spelled number wrong, but I hadn't defined what number1 is. So it just errored out and told me that number1 is not defined. But the one I want to talk the most about is something called a semantic error. A semantic error is by far the most difficult to deal with because it technically isn't an error at all. When you have a semantic error, it means that the program is actually still running as it's supposed to. It's just not doing what the user wants it to do. It's like when there's a discrepancy between what you told it to do and what you actually want it to do. Here, even though I made this simple math question game, but every time I get the question right, it still says that I got the answer wrong. And eventually I figured out what the problem is. It's that, well, for one, there's different types of values in Python. There's strings and there's also integers. This first part, the computer generates integers between 1 and 10 when he makes the math problem. And when you input something, an input is automatically a string because it's the user typing something. And since I didn't convert the string to an integer here, it recognizes what I typed as 16 with quotations around it, which is actually a lot different from just 16. So it sees it as this, and then it just says I got it wrong, even though I got it right. And that's because it's looking for this. To fix that, you have to You have to implicitly convert the answer into an integer, and that's the only way that it'll tell you that you got the question correct. To conclude, I picked a May project that actually doesn't end within the month of May. Even far beyond this month itself, I'm going to continue doing the same thing. Possibly as soon as next week, I'll be back programming again. And it'll be a big part of my life next year and in the future when I go to pursue a career in computer science. And so there's a lot of things that I don't know yet because I've only spent roughly a month learning about it. But throughout the course of the rest of my life, I hope to possibly shorten that list of things that I don't know about Python. Thank you very much. Questions about anything, how they work, anything? Yes?
I was wondering, because I know nothing about programming language, so can you give us an example of how something like this could work in the world out there, or what it is used for?
Well, it's used for,
purpose?
I've seen it used for a lot of things. For one, there are different modules you can download that you can use it for games. For example, I've seen Pygame, which is, it gives you a lot more options in what you want to create. For example, I've seen it used in, or smaller parts of larger programs because it's very simple and easy to read, and because of that, it's very easy to maintain. So it's used very widely for things like that. Yes?
How would you describe the troubleshooting process? You're talking about errors, and they can sometimes be really hard to find.
Errors. Well, for one thing, there's one thing I didn't mention. There's a built-in debugger in Python, for example, and the debugger lets you step through lines of code one by one. So if you run into a problem that you can't solve by looking at the code, a lot of the time it's easier to look at the debugger. But the problem with the debugger for me was it just, sometimes, for example, it'll step into lines of code, and by that I mean, for example, if you look right here, I'm calling on random, which is a built-in function of Python. And random lets you tell the computer to generate a number between two constraints. Like I pick 1 and 10 for it to generate numbers between. And it'll actually step into that built-in function of random, for example. Obviously, there's no problem with random because it's built into Python, but it'll just step into it and you get to look into that too. And it gets very confusing, and it's a lot of the time it's hard to know what part of the program that you're inside of. So the troubleshooting process gets more difficult or easy depending on how long the program itself is rather than how difficult the problem itself is to fix. Yes, Riza? You were first.
Thank you.
Right, so if you had to design a, I don't know if you can answer this one, but maybe you can try. If you had to design a programming curriculum for 5 through 12, what kind of courses would you put in there that would be helpful for students to have? I'm asking this question partially because I know of a company that came to work in the USA, and they were trying to hire programmers, and they were very unhappy with the average level of programming here in the US, and all the best programmers were taken up by Silicon Valley. So it's very hard to find. The average programmer wasn't good enough because they were complaining that the American universities teach, or if you start working in programming, big companies, people end up doing one little thing, one loop in a big program, whereas this company, people have a very good overall skill level. So based on that, have you learned anything about what kind of programming we should have in schools?
Well, it's tough to say something that would be completely genuine because I've seen so many different books and different things online that help you learn Python. So I can tell you an answer, but it's so heavily influenced by what I've seen that it's not really a genuine answer. But I'm still very glad you brought that up because it's hard. There aren't that many people that know at this age level about Python, and that's mostly because you have to search it out for yourself. In school, they just teach you the more simple concepts about it. And I feel like maybe if they accelerated it more, then people would learn a lot more about it. But one thing is, if you're not really interested in it, it's hard to get people to continue with the curriculum, whatever curriculum you put forth for Python.
If you could go back to 5th grade right now, what do you think would have been nice to have available?
Well, I wish I started in 5th grade with what I'm starting with now, because even though I wouldn't be able to go at as fast of a rate as I am now, I still would be a lot further on at this point in time than I would have been if I just started earlier, or later, I mean. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, did you say that Python is related to Monty Python?
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the author named it Python because at the time that he was creating it, he was reading about Monty Python's Flying Circus, and he decided that he needed a name that was kind of unique and mysterious for his programming language, and that's why he chose to call it Python.
And my other question is, relating to your problem, the game, the number game, the reaction of the computer is coding that you put, right?
Yeah, it's all coding that I put.
So my question is, do you think that your personality influences the answer that the computer gives?
Well, I can't really tell you no because scientific research would tell you otherwise. Obviously, whatever I put into that, anything I type into any coding language is heavily influenced by my
So
personality.
if it's your computer, it's going to be very sarcastic and sassy, right?
Yeah.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that when you were talking about the one program that you had that thwarted you, you kept referring to it as he. I thought that was interesting because at the beginning you said you were more interested in learning languages to talk to computers rather than to communicate languages with other people, but you referred to it as he. In your process, you know, what do you get from it emotionally from this? I mean, you're clearly passionate about this, and I know nothing about all of this, and I now think this is phenomenal, just based on watching you deal with it. What did you get from it personally in terms of this?
Well, to answer your question, the reason I referred to it as he for one is because when I was creating it, I kind of envisioned it as being myself, and since I'm male, that's why I referred to it as he. So kind of personally, I don't know. I guess it gives you more insight into what kind of a thinker you are because you really have to think rationally to fix a lot of the problems. And a lot of the programs I made could have been written different ways and still had the same output. So I guess it's just interesting to consider. Yeah.
You said you're going computer science
Yeah.
next year. So I think it's important that like you started this kind of on your own, and that ambition is really what's going to get you through. It's hard to teach this stuff in school. I taught Python in the 6th grade this year, so you'll be happy to know that. Same kind of programs that you're doing. And it helps to get a little primer in school, but if you don't have the motivation, you're just not going to get anywhere. So I'd say, and all of it's on the internet nowadays, so you really can't learn it on your own. So like as you go through school, I help you pursue your own projects. And just take the school projects that's like, you know, helping you on your own journey. So you like wait to take the Java class to learn Java, then you're wasting time.
Yeah.
So like if you want to learn Python, you can do it now on the internet.
Yeah, it's one of the things it's very easy to learn on your own, but it's very hard to continue with if you don't have the motivation yourself. So I would highly agree with you, yeah. Yeah.
Was working on this Python similar to programming a computer that you did?
Well, programming is the wrong word because I didn't program computers before. I built computers, and you just research the parts, and it's very intimidating for a lot of people, but in truth it isn't that difficult. It's one of the things that people will think you're really smart if you can do it, but it doesn't take much time to learn how to build computers yourself. But I would say that I guess they're in some ways very similar, but with building a computer you have to be a lot more careful because you're dealing with parts that have hundreds of dollars in worth. And if you mess up significantly, you can like damage a part or destroy it or short it, and then you're down hundreds of dollars. But when you make an error in a program, it's as simple as seeing what the error is and fixing and rerunning it, and you don't really lose much. Thank you. Thank you for coming.